Welcome back. And here's where things really start to get fun. In this section, we'll be working with a complex dataset and using that to draw SVG elements on a page using D3's enter, update, exit paradigm to build a crude bar chart. For this first video in this section, we'll take a look back at our flower dataset from section 2. We'll add a random numerical value to our dataset to be mapped to the height of our rectangles. Next, we'll add these elements to our canvas, and in doing so, revisit D3's scale function to make our bars fit on the page. First of all, let's copy our template to index4.html. Let's insert the flowers that we had in section 2 and add 3 more flowers, a rose, a tulip, and a daisy. Just to remind ourselves, we have an array of JSON objects here. This should bring us to a total of 8 JSON objects in our data. We can see that we don't really have any numerical values besides ease of care, but this is more of a categorical value anyway. For the purposes of this video, we'll add a random number to our objects, which will then map to the height of our bars in our bar chart. In order to add this random number, we could go into our data array and simply add a new key manually. But this is a great opportunity to introduce JavaScript's built-in map function, which we can use to iterate through each element, manipulate it in some way, and return our new object. This is a common technique used in many programming languages, especially when dealing with large or complex datasets. We'll pass an anonymous function as an argument to our map function. We'll then assign a random integer between 1 and 100 to be our value key and return this new object. So now that we have the new array of data, let's add it to the canvas in the form of SVG rectangles. Before we write the code to perform this action though, let's think a bit about how D3's enter function actually works. The central utility to the D3 library is binding data to visual elements on the page, be they HTML or SVG. Hence the title, Data-Driven Documents. So when we make a selection using D3 select all and call the data function on the selection, D3 tries to match up the elements of our data array to the elements of our selection. Calling the enter function on the bound data to the selected elements will only return an array of corresponding HTML or SVG elements if there are fewer elements in the selection than the number of elements in our data array. The other way around, that is, fewer data items than selected elements, would cause the exit function to iterate over the excess elements. We'll talk more about that later. This diagram is meant to help us understand the binding between actual data and selected virtual elements in a visual manner. So let's apply this knowledge of how the enter function works to our code and add elements to the page. First, we need our SVG canvas. Let's add it, as usual, to our content div. A width of 500 and height of 300 should be good for our purposes here. Let's make those constants at the top. First, we need to make our selection by selecting all rectangle elements under our SVG element. Since this is an empty selection, meaning that there are not yet any rect elements on the page, and our dataset contains 8 elements, there is a mismatch between the data binding, with more data items than actual elements. So to this selection, we will call the enter to iterate over 8 times, since 8 data items minus 0 elements is 8. Before we overcomplicate things by setting different attributes, let's just append our elements to the SVG, load our page, and inspect the DOM to make sure they are being added. Okay, great! There they are! Now we can go ahead and set our attributes. We'll set our X and Y coordinates statically for now. We'll have our bars drawn from the bottom left of our canvas using the height, and our X value will just be 0 for now. As for our height, we would like this to correspond to our new value key in our data. As we've done previously, we'll pass an anonymous function to our height attribute that will return the value of value and set our height. As for the width, we'll also set it to 20 pixels statically. Now, let's refresh the page. Uh-oh, there's nothing there. This makes for a good debugging moment. If we open the inspector and take a look at our rectangles, we'll notice that they're all off the screen. This is because we've set the rectangle's y values to the height of the canvas. When the height attribute is applied, they get drawn down off the bottom of the canvas. So to fix this, let's make our y value the height of the canvas minus the value of the node. Save and reload. Now we see a rectangle on the page. Okay, but why does it look like there's only one bar? Well, if we inspect our elements, we'll see that they're all overlapping each other since we did not specify a dynamic x value. In order to space our bars out a bit more, let's multiply their index value by a factor of 20, the width of our bars, as the x value. Reload and voila, there they are. If we continue to refresh the page, we'll notice that the bars change height. This is because we're assigning a different random value to our height every time. Alright, so most of this video was a refresher course of material we've covered earlier. But it is important that we take a hard second look at how the data and enter functions work to better prepare ourselves for debugging code down the line. In our next video, we'll focus on making some of our attribute values more dynamic and doing a deep dive into D3's scale functions. See you then.